hard to know whether to be cheery at the end of the week
or
whether to be a bit gloomy and frustrated.
Well, I was very,
between.
I was very cheery when the restrictions all got lifted, even knowing that it was all being done as a kind of a sideshow to the Boris Johnson act of, well, let's just do this and see if everybody likes it. Which apparently seems to have worked, unfortunately.
Well, it's worked to a degree, and yes, it is good news that all the restrictions have been lifted. Credit where credit's due, unless you're one of the unfortunate few thousand children who are still in a school up and down the country where the head teachers or the unions are still insisting, despite a complete lack of any credible evidence to the contrary, they're still insisting that children remain muzzled and masked and therefore unable to learn as well and to integrate as well. And I think that's an absolute disgrace.
That is an absolute disgrace. And I think all parents should actually take a stand and say, well, do you know what? I'm going to make my child exempt. They don't want to wear a mask anymore.
That's right.
But people don't want to seemingly do that, though.
No, although I was heartened a couple of weeks ago when actually we were hearing about whole schools, whole year groups that were rebelling against masks. And I think that was a key moment. And I think the other key moment, early at the beginning of this week, was the news that the Us For Them group were going to sue the government with regard to masks in children, and I think that actually really helped stop this nonsense.
Well, I was talking to Francis Hall yesterday about the whole business of suing, because so many people were punished, so many people were fined, so many people had terrible things happen to them as a result of the COVID regulations that were brought in by the government, which the government clearly didn't seem to care about adhering to themselves.
It's a really interesting point, and you touched on it in your intro. In a sense, it's almost like government has stopped. Or is the government now being led by Sue Gray? I'm not quite clear. Everything seems to have pressed the pause button until she reports, and who knows what she will say and when that will be.
Well, I'm pretty sure she's not going to say anything very interesting. I'm pretty sure it's all going to be whitewashed.
Yeah, but we know that there were massive breaches of the rules in Number 10. We know that people who did that elsewhere in the country were fined loads of money. So are all those people in Number 10 going to be fined? Or, possibly, should all of the other fines, tens of thousands of fines imposed across the whole country, actually, should they be basically reimbursed on the basis that if our leaders didn't believe what they were telling us, then frankly all the fines should be scrapped?
Well, Francis said something very interesting, that the fines themselves were never actually lawful, and that if you challenged them and forced somebody to take you to court, that could give you a very different outcome. And he quoted one case where somebody who had been fined £10,000 went to court, and the judge agreed that the fine should be applied, but only applied a £200 fine, because he said 10,000 was disproportionate and ridiculous.
Completely ridiculous. And maybe everybody at Number 10 should be fined £10,000. And
then just for being crap.
Just for being rubbish.
Yeah.
And for not showing proper leadership and not setting a proper example. And then see what happens. And I suspect you might find that actually all the fines get
But I mean,
get
you said
off.
something interesting to me just before we started the show, because I've been looking at this blackmailing story and thinking to myself, yes, of course, it's a bit like House of Cards. It's a bit. Michael Fabricant was on the other day saying, well, of course, it would be ridiculous to consider that threats like this would be made. I mean, we all know those threats are made. However, I just think this is a bit of a distraction, isn't it?
Look, I think the reality is that you can think it's a bit of a distraction. Look, this has gone on since time began in the House of Commons. That doesn't mean that it's been acceptable. And I actually think all credit to William Ragg for actually blowing the lid on what is unacceptable behaviour from the whips. And I think I admire MPs, if they don't like a suggestion or a proposed vote from the government, if they've got the courage and the principle and the integrity to say, I'm going to vote against it, it's wrong, it's not in my constituents' benefit interests, then that should be respected. And the idea that you can suddenly say, well, I'm going to pull a few strings and that primary school's not going to get a couple of new classrooms or not going to be rebuilt, I actually think is disgraceful.
But, I mean,
if that goes on.
But that's Wakeford's claim. He's known here at the Independent Republic as Weasel Wakeford.
Yeah,
the man who wants to have a by-election, except for when he decides to move to the Labour Party and now doesn't.
And that is appalling. But I think it's the principle, and I think what William Ragg has blown the lid on it is just how far that is taken. And yes, you can say, well, MPs have just got to basically just sort of man up and take it. But no, I think what we're hearing is actually it's a bit more than that. There's a balance between a negotiation and a bit of leverage between two sides of a debate, of an argument, and actually employing what broadly amounts to a form of blackmail stroke corruption where you're really saying you're not going. It's like what they call in America. They call it sort of pork barrel politics.
But this again, surely, is all about saving Boris Johnson and all of the things that are now happening in Parliament. This is why, for me, he still has to go. It's all about him. It's not about what's good for the country. It's not about whether we should be making particular parts of policy work. It's all about, what can I do to make myself even more stable? What can I do to make myself more reliable? What can I do to keep myself in the job?
Of course, they threw out a bunch of policies, sort of red meat, to try and impress the Daily Mail and the Telegraph, which is, in a sense it did, and both those newspapers have sort of panicked. They thought, we've overreached.
Yes, I mean,
Boris.
I don't wish to in any way cast aspersions on anybody's family or anybody's health, but they put it out there and then they complain about the fact that there's intrusion. That story about how one of his children was very ill with COVID was absolute and utter nonsense. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but the way it was written, the way that the sort of tears were flowing over the page, the way that sympathy was being garnered, she was very ill. Well, really? Well, join the club. Lots of people have got kids who are very ill. Don't put that out there now and try and get sympathy.
Yeah, no, I think the thing with the Prime Minister is that he is on the ropes. He's right on the edge. In a sense, Wakeford's defection probably did actually save him on the day.
Yeah.
And
do you think he's a double agent? Oh, Wakeford. He's gone over to Labour just to
it's hard to know,
but
but I think that what do I think? Really, he is waiting for the Grey Report. We shouldn't be surprised if the Grey Report looks bad. It's not impossible that actually the Prime Minister goes before he's pushed, and that's something just to think about.
Yes,
wasn't it extraordinary how, despite on Tuesday having sort of appeared so downcast and almost in tears when he was talking to Beth Rigby, the following day actually he came out and gave a blistering performance in the House of Commons. It was almost as though the weight of the world had lifted off his shoulders.
What you mean? He wasn't really in tears. He was just pretending to be in tears.
I don't know, but it was an extraordinary difference, quite bizarre.
Yeah.
But he is in deep trouble. It's a matter of when, not if.
Right.
And I think that...
But I don't think he believes that. I think he thinks that this has all gone away. I think he genuinely, like all kind of people who believe themselves to be untouchable.
I think he knows that he's in deep trouble. And he's a clever man. He knows that, frankly, he hasn't got many friends in the House of Commons. He's never been a sort of someone to get on well with lots of other parliamentarians. And I think that's going to come back and bite him. It's just a matter of when, not if.
Yes, but I mean, has he quelled the backbenches? I suppose is one question. I mean, David Davis again. That was an incredible intervention in Prime Minister's questions. I was here watching it. It was live on this show, and I was like, "Blimey, that's amazing!" But then he was kind of ridiculed for doing it and made to look like he had overreached and overstretched and had hit the wrong target at the wrong time.
I'm told that he made that decision. He hadn't told anybody he was going to do that. And he only finally made that decision as he walked into the chamber, is my understanding.
And presumably after watching the performance that Boris had given, which for me was hopeless.
That's interesting. I think relative to Tuesday, I think Boris came out fighting on Wednesday in PMQs.
I know a lot of people said that.
But David Davis's intervention was really significant. In my view, it was like a Geoffrey Howe moment. It was really significant. And sure, lots of people have said, he did the wrong thing, but he's a very senior, experienced MP.
And a pretty well-respected one as well.
And actually highly respected. And my sense is that we're in a pause mode. And we don't know when Sue Gray is going to report.
Well, we think it's next week, we're told.
She's got so many parties to report on and to investigate. Who knows?
But the longer it goes on, the less important that report is. And the less likely is that report to be in any way hard-hitting, I think.
That's possible, but equally, so many MPs have said they've got to wait for the report. I think a lot of people are just sort of sitting on the fence. And I think that if there's a lot of people who are looking for something in that report on which to make their final decision. And I think a lot of people actually want Boris out. And let's remember, of course, there are a huge number of Tory MPs that think they're going to stand for the leadership. I mean, if there is a leadership campaign, you would be looking at 15 to 20 candidates, probably throwing their hat in the ring. So I think some extraordinary things will happen. Yes, they might think there's a bit of a lull at the moment, and there's never a good time to have a change of leader. But there's a huge amount of anger out there. Who knows? For all we know, Putin might come to Boris's rescue, because if Putin invades Ukraine, then we're into a wholly different place, Mike. Wholly different place.
Absolutely. But that's the other reason why you would ask the question, do you really want to have Boris Johnson, a man who has singularly taken us down all sorts of roads in the past and has proven to us that he is entirely interested in only one thing, and that's the preservation of Boris Johnson? Do you really want a guy like that in charge of a major international crisis?
Well, and then you've got Biden in the
Biden's
US.
Even worse.
I mean, he was sort of caught saying, well, it depends on the nature of the invasion. If he does a bit, then we might respond this way. And if he does a bit more, I mean, I was just absolutely hopeless.
Well, he's terrified, isn't he, of doing anything overseas because Trump taught him the lesson. Actually, people don't want to have American troops anywhere outside of America because America has become incredibly isolationist.
Yeah, but of course, no one's talking about troops. What we're talking about here is the economic sanctions, and they need to be robust. They need to be massive, and Putin needs to know that if he does invade, then actually he would be cut off from the banking system.
No, but what I mean by troops on the ground is that America is a very simple country. You know that, I know that, right? It's not that they're not quite... They're just not very sophisticated when it comes to international relations. And people who live in America, even those who are quite well educated, don't really understand the rest of the world, and they don't want anything to do with it. And they'd rather everybody just stayed in America and didn't go anywhere.
Yes, I mean, they can be quite isolationist, but equally, obviously, they've been essentially the global superpower since the Second World War, and they've played the role of the global policeman. But of course, that's changing, as we saw essentially from the Afghanistan moment when we talked about that. Yeah. But this is a really significant moment. I'm going to be talking about it on Sunday because if Putin invades Ukraine, the direction of gas prices, commodity prices, they could go up very sharply, very fast, and that could be really, really uncomfortable for all of us. And all of this for Putin is about the money. He knows he's literally got the continental Europe. I mean, he's got them by the short and curlies because basically they import almost 50% of their gas needs from Russia, and Putin wants the Nord Stream 2 pipeline open. I mean, you look at the fracturing here. You've got Germany that didn't allow the UK to fly over its airspace to take the weapons to Ukraine. Why? Because they didn't want to upset Russia, because they want to make sure that Russia doesn't turn off the gas taps. Yeah. So you start to understand the leverage that Putin has got. And, this is a really, really dangerous moment. Yeah. And, we worry about the cost of living. We worry about inflation. I fear we haven't seen anything yet as to what could happen over the coming months.
I'm glad you brought that up because we're going to talk about the energy crisis, which is what is going on out there. That's the big thing that's worrying everybody. I've got a great tweet here from Angela because Rishi Sunak has talked about giving away some money, 500 quid to the poorest families. Angela says, Rishi's £500 for the poorest regarding energy bills. Surely it's better to cut the green tax and the VAT to help everyone. This is another Rishi charm offensive like his Eat Out to Help Out. And look how that ended up. Taxpayers can't keep funding whims from the Treasury. It's a good point.
Look, it is a good point. And, I mean, it is awful what's happening to energy prices. Yeah. Everybody is seeing letters land on their doormat through the letterbox with horrendous numbers, doubling, tripling. I mean, people just can't believe it. And it's all due to the government's failed energy policies for the last decade. And yes, I think that the environmental levies, which represent 25% of your electricity bill, the VAT on domestic fuel, that we can now cut thanks to Brexit, everybody in the Labour Party, thanks to Brexit, these things should go. But even then, I think we may end up with, if gas prices go up even higher, Mike, you could end up with an energy equivalent of furlough, because actually some of this will become completely unsustainable. And the government is being naive, thinking this is a short-term spike.
Because also
Putin wants this to be long-term.
You can't give money away to people who can't afford to pay their bills. I mean, that's a ludicrous idea, isn't it?
Well, it's a real problem. Yeah. But the point is that the real issue here is that what's happening in the free market has failed here because we're in almost like a warlike situation against Putin. And so anything that people could reasonably have predicted has now gone out the window. A bit like when we first locked down, you could never reasonably predict that. No. You couldn't predict that energy prices, the gas prices in the UK would go up by 3 or 4 times in 6 months. Yeah. And I think the simple response to that is it highlights how we've got to be self-reliant as a nation on our own energy. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of pounds worth of our own shale gas under our feet that's owned by all of us, Mike. Yes. All of your listeners, all of these great people who listen to Talk Radio and everybody, we own this shale gas. Right. Why would you leave the treasure a kilometre underground when you could actually bring it to the ground safely, happily using new technology?
Well, the answer to that is simple, isn't it? It's the green lobbyists, the people like Zach Goldsmith and Carrie, formerly known as Simmons, now Johnson, who says, oh no, we can't be doing that.
Well, if they want to pay Angela's energy bill, then they're very welcome to.
I wish they'd just get out of the way.
Otherwise, then actually we want this golden gas out of our ground that we own, because that actually you could halve our gas prices in the UK if we used our own gas as opposed to buying Putin's gas and Macron's electricity.
Well, you could reduce the costs altogether by simply slashing VAT and the ridiculous green subsidy.
That's a good start.
25%, a quarter off the bill already.
But imagine if I did even more for you. Yeah. Imagine if I halved your gas bill. Because we're using our own gas that we all own. This is what's out there. I'm going to be talking about this again and again and again. I think it's an absolute disgrace what is going on, what these eco-zealots have done to the poorest in society.
But how have we allowed these people, and we're going to be talking to Net Zero Watch later on in the show, how have we allowed these kind of green millionaires to basically piggyback money off the government, get subsidies to run wind farms, get subsidies to run solar panel companies, get subsidies to kind of supposedly make our energy greener, and all that's happening is they're just getting richer and richer, and we're getting stooped.
It's very simple that they have lobbied and persuaded feeble cabinet ministers, weak leaders who actually have been more interested in the vested interests of their mates as opposed to looking after the likes of Angela and millions and millions and millions of ordinary families up and down the country who are being utterly shafted by this process.
Because everybody really I've now started asking the question that nobody can answer. What actually is net zero? What does it mean? What is it
I'll tell you what it means,
What is it?
I'll tell you what it means. It means impoverishment, fuel poverty, and sending our jobs and our money to China and Russia. And it is totally unacceptable, and it really winds me up. It's the thing that's infuriating me more than anything else now. Because once again, it's about the wealthy middle class, the metropolitan eco-zealots, who are impoverishing the lowest paid, the least well off, who do some of the most important jobs, the key worker jobs
everything that
keep us fed.
Right, but everything that we see, switch on the BBC, switch on Sky, any kind of, a media company that you like apart from this one, and all you get is, well, of course, we all know that we have to reach net zero. And I'm throwing things at the TV at this point. I'm going, what do you mean? We all know we have to get to net zero. What does it even mean?
Well,
nobody knows.
As I say, it means impoverishing millions of people, sending our jobs and money overseas when actually we could keep both jobs and money here. And we need to take them on this. And this is the big debate, the big campaign over the next couple of years. It all comes into this. And let me be absolutely clear. We're only at the foothills of the cost mountain of net zero, just at the foothills. You think it's bad at the moment, it gets a whole bunch worse over the next 3 or 4 years unless we change this.
And this is what I keep saying to people about Boris Johnson. Forget about the parties, right? Forget about the hypocrisy, forget about the COVID nonsense. Then think about the one policy that he pushed through while COVID was going on. And there's only one policy that he pushed through, only one thing that he was concentrating on, and that was COP26, the green agenda, and all of that rubbish about, making us all the world leader in green economy.
And the knock-on consequences of that is that taxes go up and up and up, and people feel poorer and poorer and poorer. And it's very bad news.
Yes, and make no mistake, I'm no fan of Keir Starmer, as anybody who listens to this show knows, and I'm certainly not batting for Keir Starmer, and I'm certainly not suggesting that he would do a better job, because he wouldn't. But what I do want to see is somebody in the Tory party coming forward to run it like a Conservative party, which there hasn't been doing for years.
Good luck with that. You could be waiting a very long time, I'm afraid, Mike, because that just ain't going to happen. If there's a change of leadership, which I think there will be, you will see no change of policy on the most important thing that affects the most people across this country, which is the cost of living ruined by the net zero target.
And of
we
course,
need to take it on.
The one final thing I want to raise with you is the rather ludicrous sideshow, which is being sort of pushed by the likes of Adonis and Heseltine, which is that if we get rid of Boris, we can get rid of Brexit, which is so ludicrous I don't really even want to talk about it. But tell us what you make of that.
Look, it's hysterically ridiculous. You can understand why they're saying it, but it's a nonsense. But here's the thing. Watch the weasel words of the Labour Party, because they all say we've no plans to rejoin the EU.
Those plans.
That's today.
Right.
That means that tomorrow their plans are going to change, and all of a sudden they're going to say, we might rejoin the single market and the customs union as a starter for 10. We will call them out on that. They won't give a cast iron guarantee that they accept the vote of the British people. And I think they'll be found out on that.
I think so. Richard Tice keeping them honest. Sunday, 10 o'clock.
Sunday, we've got a lot on. We're going to be talking about Ukraine, the impact on gas prices. I'm also going to be talking about the great furlough rip-off.
Yes.
Because some companies
Why have they written off all this money?
Well, hang on. Some companies have behaved very well, and when things weren't too bad, they've actually given furlough money back that they used to protect jobs. But other companies, and I'm going to get after them on Sunday, have banked tens of millions of pounds, in one case, £100 million, when actually they're still making huge profits. I'm going to be talking about that. I'm also going to be talking about this outrage that the Home Office has now decided that it's not going to release daily numbers of the illegal crossings.
Yeah,
they're going to do
that's
it
a good way
quarterly.
of keeping it quiet.
Yeah, well, but you can see exactly what's happening here. They know that the numbers are going to be at least double last year, possibly treble, and they want to try and reduce the quantity of embarrassment. That's why they brought the Navy in, because they can basically
put it down as a national secret.
They can bring them in, and they'll be able to try and cover up. It'll be harder to see them coming off the Navy boats. That's what I think's going on. But of course, that's one of the reasons the numbers will go up, because the vile smugglers will be able to say to people, it's safer than ever.
Yeah.
Because guess what? The Navy are going to pick you up halfway across.
And they're not going to even count how many of you there are. One final thing, I never had you down as a Meatloaf fan, but you looked a bit sad this morning when you came in.
I was very sad, because actually, yes, believe it or not, in my teenage years at school, I loved Meatloaf.
Did you?
I loved Bad Out of Hell.
Right. Great album.
I was briefly amazing album, and yes, I was a headbanger.
Were you?
I was a
Did you have
headbanger
long
as a
hair?
teenager. I need to clarify that.
We need to find pictures. Anybody else out there who knew Mr. Tice when he was a young man,